Welcome to Mo's Market Pulse. I'm your host, Sara Mokaram, founder of Mo Digital Solutions, where we help businesses hit their revenue goals and thrive. On this podcast, we talk with industry leaders about their business, market trends, growth strategies, and what's ahead. On today's episode, we are joined by Stephen Arndt, President and CIO of Silver Linings Technology. Stephen, I'm really excited to have you on today, and thank you so much for joining us. Let's start by painting a picture of the business and your journey in shaping it. Can you take us back to the founding of Silver Linings and what was the original inspiration and how has that vision evolved over the years?
Sure. So, I started in IT, very long time ago in the early 80s. I was one of those kids in high school that adapted very quickly to technology. And when I got out of the Navy, got a job as a programmer and progressed pretty quickly through the ranks in terms of programming and learned what I really enjoyed the most was the full cycle of the IT process, right? How do you help the business unit? And that basically led me into IT management, but I ended up getting exposure into all aspects of IT, whether it's networking, databases, programming, etc. My father had always been kind of entrepreneur oriented, so I always envisioned myself having a company somewhere along the line, even though I was progressing up the corporate ladder. The first opportunity came when the company that I was working for in 2004 ended up being sold to another organization. And effectively, I got a large chunk of stock options and had the opportunity to start a business. And they didn't want the team that was with me. So I took many of them and formed my first IT organization. At that time, it was called IT Powered. We had some really good technologists, really good solutions. And unfortunately, I learned at that time that I'm not really good at sales and marketing. And so ended up taking that team and selling that organization, if you would, or that talent to another company that was able to do that and learn my lesson that I needed to shore up those kinds of aspects. So I worked for the buyer for 4 or 5 years, and then decided to do a more conservative approach to business and started my own consulting practice with the goal later on to forming my own team again and offering full services. So I did consulting for about 8 years and then was pushed by one of my large clients to take the plunge, take over and build the organization around me. So it was in 2017 that Silver Linings came out of my consulting practice, and we've been going ever since.
Great. And I know you mentioned one, it sounded like defining moment, but what were some other defining moments in your career, either successes or hard lessons that really shaped how you lead today?
Well, there are a number, a number of different things, but from this perspective, I certainly realize the importance of sales and marketing. Um, that you can have the smartest people in the room, but people have to know about that, and you have to have people that can communicate that to get their attention. So that was probably the biggest lesson for my organization. The other thing is I would say two strong things that I would promote. One is I run into so many people that are risk averse and afraid to do something. And I would encourage people to get over that fear, because if you don't take a risk, you're not ever going to get to the next level. And then the last thing is having bootstrapped this business to maintain control, that you want to be as conservative with your cash and with your expenditures as possible. So those are probably the biggest things.
Yeah, those are great. And so, for someone who doesn't know about Silver Linings, how would you describe what you offer or what you could do for them?
Okay, sure. So, in many regards, people would say, well, Silver Linings is a traditional managed service provider, IT outsourced IT provider. And to some extent, that's true. But most MSPs are grown out of what I would call the technical stack. So, it's somebody that had an aptitude, wanted to start a business. And so they really are very much the PC and the tech oriented. In my career, I ended up as a CIO for a lot of years, and it was very business focused and functionally focused. And it's a different mindset. So if a person's not having to run a large organization with a lot of people versus a small organization, how you think is very different. So we approach things from that kind of business side of things. I think that's a huge fundamental difference. We don't count PCs, for instance, where our charges isn't by employee or by PC, which almost all MSPs. It's really around the function of the business. We look at, I guess, holistically, locations are more important than number of PCs because each location, now you're defining things by routers and switches and the macro side of things. Does that make sense?
Yep, that does. And are there specific industries or business types that you think are kind of your ideal for working with?
Yeah, definitely. So, my personal background was predominantly in the healthcare or post-acute healthcare side. So that was a natural fit for as we grew our business to focus on post-acute. And the other common terms would be assisted living, skilled nursing, home health, hospice. So that's very much our focus. Part of that footprint involves what I would call multi-location organizations, as opposed to many of the MSPs tend to be geographically focused. We actually like to focus on organizations that have a lot of locations that are all over the place and our expertise in being able to manage them remotely. We can't have boots on the ground everywhere. So how do you solve that?
Great. And so, what are the biggest shifts that you're seeing right now in IT for those assisted senior living or post acute care, especially in terms of like compliance or tech adoption?
Well, each subsector of that industry kind of has different drivers, so to speak. So on the what we would say more acute side or the skilled nursing side, there is definitely a pinch in that industry in terms of increased compliance, reduced reimbursement, and so their margins are really thin. So efficiency is super important. Staffing costs are dramatic, so being able to manage staffing is super important. So having really good systems in place to maximize that is critical, and as much as possible to lengthen out the equipment refresh cycles because they don't have the capital to refresh things as often as other segments of the industry. I think on the other spectrum of things, on the assisted living or independent living, what's interesting is a demand for more activities, more entertainment. So we've seen a big shift, and this is crazy, from the old idea of cable television. Everybody had that. Now everybody's streaming television. So that's putting a huge demand on the networks. And many of the existing facilities are having to retro design how to meet that demand of the new facilities. Obviously, we could kind of build that in, but it's still an immature model. There's not 1,000 solutions out there. You just plug and play with it. So that balancing of that entertainment requirements, and I think that's only going to increase.
Yeah, that makes complete sense with all the streaming and that bandwidth that's going into all of those needs that people expect for their entertainment these days.
Exactly.
So I've also seen that you've expanded into supporting cannabis related businesses. Can you just share about how that came about, that transition, moving into that industry, as well
Sure.
as any, surprising overlaps or contrast between the healthcare and cannabis tech?
Yeah. So actually, when we first got into cannabis, I was surprised at how much overlap there really is. So a lot of the states' first legalization of cannabis was in medical cannabis. And from a cannabis perspective, the retail sites has this model of smaller sites, but they're all over the place. So again, this multi-location. The other thing that was even more surprising was the level of compliance requirements around the cannabis business. In many regards, I would consider even more excessive than they are in healthcare. Not only do you have to track the cannabis product from seed to sale, but then you have to add this whole layer of surveillance, which we're starting to see in the post-acute healthcare, but not nearly as predominant in cannabis where everything is videoed. And there's a lot higher security, physical security, because those businesses tend to be at a much higher risk of crime and those types of incidences. So that's kind of the differences, but the similarities in terms of multi-site and actually just running the business, network infrastructure, et cetera, are pretty similar.
Yeah, that's interesting perspective, but totally makes sense of those overlaps there. So I want to move now to growth. And I know that you mentioned the importance or that you realize the importance of, marketing and sales. So I know that you serve these industries that can be kind of high touch, high compliance. How do you balance, these personalized service with the need also to scale?
It's an interesting, how do I balance it? Well, I think everything's always a struggle or a challenge to get it right. And the cycles ebb and flow of whether we're doing a good job or not. For us, I think I'll answer that question by saying, for me, all of it comes down to the team that I've got. And what I've tried to do more so than anything else is create an organization where my individuals are empowered. Yeah, we have procedures for training and to understand how to maintain compliance, but I really want my individuals to think for themselves and to be so customer driven that they don't need me or a management team to interact with every customer. They're empowered to be able to make those decisions and to solve those problems right at the ground level. And I think that makes a big difference. Our long-term growth strategy, and we're not quite there, is honestly to serve our clients so well that our growth comes from referral rather than any other major outside source. And that's a tall order, and it's certainly a challenge, but I think we do get better every day, and we're starting to see more and more referrals as a result of that.
So I know that you mentioned referrals, and that's kind of the ideal, but what else is working for you or strategies that you guys are using right now in terms of getting in front of ideal clients?
Yeah, so it's a mix. I would love to say everything works, but that's not the case. Most in both of those industries kind of have different niche or different styles. So let me give you an example. A sales cycle with cannabis is a little bit slower, but they're also, or I'm sorry, a little bit quicker, but they're almost easier to get when they're building a new organization. They're very loath to change once they've gotten something in place. With the healthcare side of things, it's a very long sales cycle and usually multiple years. So the secret there really is around maintaining visibility and recognizing when their current provider or internal team just doesn't have that capability and being able to shore that up. So on that side of things, for instance, we do a lot of what I would call co-managed engagements where they may have had an internal team, but they don't have the width of experience that we've got. And so we'll supplement that. And then in some cases over time, we end up filling the gaps if those internal teams leave. That's not at all the case in the cannabis side.
And so, how do you find out if they need that co-management approach or, find those sort of clients to even get a conversation with?
So yeah, there's the key there. I think what we've done, and maybe you, Sarah, could tell us how to do it better. But what we've done is you try to show up at the places that our clients are at, so industry conferences or events, to have those conversations. Try to present some of the expertise of my 20 plus years in that side of the industry with technology to make myself available to them. So part of it is the visibility, part of it is just an accessibility. And again, there's a lot of word of mouth as well. So that's where that referral stuff, that's kind of our strategy there. On the cannabis side, we don't have that longer term visibility or anything like that. So for us, it's really trying to show up at more local events and to leverage those events as well as one-on-one conversations to help folks.
And so, what would winning look like over the next 12 to 18 months from a growth standpoint?
Oh, what would winning look? Winning to me is if my process was predictable enough that I could say next year we're going to hit this target if we do these 10 things. We hit targets not all the time, but we're seeing growth, but that consistency of it or the predictability of that to me is an elusive target. So if I could get to that predictable model, I think that to me is the ultimate win because then I can repeat that model.
Definitely. So, shifting gears now from growth, I want to get into real challenges because, as you know, every business definitely has pain points or challenges along the way. So, what part of the business keeps you up at night right now? Whether it's staffing, tech bottlenecks, client turnover, or something else entirely
Well,
different.
fortunately, nothing keeps me up at night because I try to balance things out. Give me the most angst when I hear them is a client has been contacted by a nefarious actor or they see something on there. And even though, keep in mind, we we look at each client unique. So they're not a cookie cutter. We don't do the same thing for everybody. It's a negotiative process. So with some, I would say they're security profile is more robust than for others. And obviously, we try to communicate and partner with them, but every business is different in their needs. So I think there's always that concern of, okay, you're under some sort of attack or microscope. Are we doing the appropriate things, and are we teaching them appropriately? And we've definitely had to deal with issues with our clients. And I feel like we've done a good job. And in fact, I'll stand behind what we've done and the fact that we've had to deal with incidents rather than saying, oh, gee, I think there's a little bit of a head in the sand approach. If you say, oh, nothing's going to happen, we've got everything perfect. Well, that's not real, because if that was the case, then we wouldn't see all these headlines all the time of organizations that have lots of IT staff focused solely on this issue getting attacked. So to me, it's all around that right balance and mitigation. That's probably one main thing that I think it is going to continue for a long time. The other things technologically, obviously, you even mentioned this earlier, AI progressing so rapidly right now. So just trying to keep up with that, just to make sure that we're helping our clients take advantage of that and progress with it, because for them that's a huge potential competitive advantage. Are we doing the things to help enable them? That's more important to me. Internally, from a staffing perspective, I can't tell you that it's easy to hire IT people because it's not. There's not only the salary component of it, but the training and the aptitude. There's a whole thing. I do think that over the years, through much trial and effort, we've reached a much more effective model, but we definitely see a lot of turnover with new staff, purposeful in some case. And so now I'm kind of getting to the next level, is how do I do a better job of actually hiring better people to fit at least our organization. So once they're in, we either get them settled pretty quickly, or we help them find a different place pretty quickly. But I'd rather be much more effective at bringing in the right people first.
And so I know you mentioned AI and wanting to help your clients with that. Can you expand on that, about how you guys work with your clients with AI and what you're helping them implement?
Well, there are different tools. Part of it is education stuff. Right now, there's a lot of focus around the marketing stuff. We're trying to look at AI optimization procedures for just routine processes that take place. So what can AI take over and supplant there? I guess there's different use cases. Marketing seems to be the early win for most folks, because everybody tends to be hoping to acquire new business. And I think there's lots of material around that. So I think we do a pretty good job on that side, less effective on that process side, but we're really trying to push the boundaries on that. Does that make sense?
Yep, that does. And so has there ever been a particular client situation, tech failure, or security issue that forced you to really rethink your business model or processes?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say, for me, my first round of business and effectively failing at that, obviously there was a lot of rethinking then. I think with those other aspects, we try to think about and evaluate new tools constantly. I am not our organization, and my mindset is not necessarily do the same thing. So I'm a member of several MSP kind of groups, and it's not that I'm against what everybody else is doing, but I'm pretty critical of what all of the solutions are, and pretty open to jumping to a different solution or trying something else before the herd does. I can provide some examples of that if that's useful, but I think part of that mindset comes from my days as a CIO, where you're constantly trying to evaluate and figure out what's the best fit for an organization. So we've definitely carried that forward where I'm at now, as opposed to maybe focusing on other things like my HR process or things like that. I'd rather focus on, is this a better security tool, or is this a more effective tool for my clients? Much more client focused than internally focused.
That makes sense. So to close out, I want to take a look ahead, where you want to be in a year from now. So what are the 1 to 2 most important KPIs or metrics you'll be watching closely over the next 12 months? And can you explain why those matter to you personally?
So for us, our next major goal is a revenue milestone. We want to reach 5 million in sales, annual sales. And the reason that's a milestone is that is the trigger point where I'm going to transform Silver Linings into an employee-owned organization. So my legacy isn't to build and sell, which is, again, more of a traditional model. My legacy is to build and convert it to an employee-owned organization and ultimately phase myself out in that fashion where the organization has the procedures. And the trigger point of that is I believe that at that point we'll have demonstrated some of those things that we talked earlier on, right? And now we can finally get a predictable pipeline and understand how that works. We'll have enough maturity and enough variety of clients that will have seen most of the things that we have to procedurize. We'll have figured out, again, the hiring components. So all of that is kind of tied to that $5 million in sales mark, which forces us to do all of these other things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And that's a great goal, especially with that employee aspect of it too. And so for those who want to learn more about Silver Linings Technology or connect with you, where's the best place?
Best thing is our website, silverliningstechnology.com. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook and pretty much all of those channels.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to Mo's Market Pulse. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, and join us again to hear more insights from leaders coming up on future episodes. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate your time.